Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the City of Providence, State of Rhode Island. We're going to begin this meeting at the City of Providence Council Finance Committee meeting. It's the 15th of July, 2020, Wednesday. We're going to call this meeting to order, and we're going to do a roll call. Madam Clerk?
Chairman Pelosi.
Present, please.
Vice Chairwoman Ryan.
Present.
Councilwoman Castillo.
Present.
Councilwoman Anthony. Is absent. Councilman Taylor is absent. So we have 3 present, 2 absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you. I'll let the record reflect that Councilman Espinel is with us this evening. Kenny Cheverini from the City Solicitor's Office, he's here this evening. Correct, Mr. Cheverini?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I also see Gina Costa, my internal auditor. And then we are fortunate we have Colonel Chief Clemens, one of the best chiefs in America, on this evening's call, representing the City of Providence Police Department. And we have Ellen Tanar, who is also part of the, works for the City of Providence for the Healthy Communities. And I also have Commissioner Parry, he's also here. Welcome. And
thank you.
Thank you. And we also have President Pro Tem Correa present, and Chief from the Fire Department Kenyon is present also. Welcome. Okay. So we're going to get this meeting going. As you know, we've been having several conversations, discussions about the possibility of creating for lack of a better term, an emergency social service unit in the City of Providence, creating something like you have the police department, you have the fire department, and then you have potentially an emergency social service unit that would react to certain calls going through the 911 system. We were fortunate enough to have the Cahoots organization on last weekend. They came and gave us a presentation talking about what they did and how their journey was, and what it took to get from where they are today, from where they were before, and their whole big process, and the pros and cons, and the successes, and also the things they're also trying to achieve, which is to make it better and make it a more create a better impact, a more positive impact in their community. So it was very informative, and we learned an awful lot. During those conversations, we learned about Denver creating their organization called STAR, and we're fortunate enough this evening to have Chris Richardson, I believe, I'm going to get the right name. He's the clinical supervisor for they call it the Crisis Intervention Response Unit, and MHCD and /DPD. He's here this evening, and we invited him, of course, and of course all our distinguished members, the committee members and council members, and of course Commissioner Parry, Chief Clemens, Zachary Kenyon, and of course Ellen Tanar, to weigh in and discuss this idea and see, and to do appropriate, to see if it's something that the city would like to do and hopefully implement. And it seems like we're looking into a positive direction. Hopefully that we can achieve this goal. The way it will present, I believe Mr. Richardson, STAR, has submitted a PowerPoint. Correct? Is that correct, Mr. Richardson?
Yes.
Thank you. And I believe the clerk will be able to flip each page. So the way we'll proceed to the committee members and council members, of course, is that first we're going to have Mr. Richardson get sworn in, give us a little background of himself, then talk about this program that's implemented in Denver. It's a new program. It just began, I believe, officially June of this year. And he'll take us through the PowerPoint. And then after that, we can go to questions, Q&A by committee members and, of course, council members. But I ask everybody to hold up on the Q&A so we can get to the PowerPoint and to learn about this exciting program. With that, I'm going to have the clerk swear in Mr. Richardson, and then we'll go from there. Mr. Richardson?
Mr. Richardson, this is a formality. If you could just raise your right hand and do you swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Yes.
Thank you.
Before you go, I'll be remiss, I can introduce myself. I'm also Councilman John Igliozzi. I'm Chairman of the Finance Committee. Welcome, Mr. Richardson. Thank you for willing to participate this evening to help educate us on this exciting program, and we're looking forward to your presentation. Sir, Mr. Clerk is going to, I guess, tee up the PowerPoint. Is that correct, Mr.
Yes,
Clerk?
Mr. Richardson, you would like me to start with the document that was a PowerPoint that you sent to me, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great.
Great. Mr. Richardson, you have the mic, sir, and
And Mr. Richardson, I'm going to share the screen, and I'll also give you, I will give you control of my mouse. I'll try to
And while Mr. Clerk is doing that, I want to remind all committee members and council members that if anybody would like to speak, please raise your hand utilizing the icon. If the icon's not working, raise your hand. If you are not, if you're not acknowledged at the time, please do not speak. You have to wait your turn. Also, I ask everybody to show proper respect to the people speaking and also to your fellow council members during this process. Please don't jump in, don't cut off, and if you have something to say, whatever, keep it on topic and not personal. Mr. Clerk, are we ready for our?
We are.
Okay. So we're gonna one more try. Does everybody see the PowerPoint yet on your end? Vice
Yes,
Chair,
Mr.
Ron?
Chair. Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Right. Mr. Richardson? Do
Excellent.
you see it? So take us through this, please.
Mr. Richardson, you should be able to accept the control of the mouse. Do you see a notification for that? Yes, you have it.
If you don't, Mr. Clerk will do it. Mr. Richardson, could you tell us a little bit about yourself first and how you came up, how you came upon to become part of this program? Could you give us a little background?
Yeah, and one, I really appreciate you guys reaching out to us. It's very rarely do I get any kind of connection points of Providence or anywhere in Rhode Island in general. So it's kind of cool just to be able to reach out to other jurisdictions, especially the ones that they don't hear from much. So my name's Chris Richardson. I'm the Associate Director of Criminal Justice Services at the Mental Health Center of Denver. I've been with the Mental Health Center of Denver for about 15 years now. Started out as case management on a high intensity treatment team, working with individuals that really are, coming out of our state mental hospitals, the jail, in and out of the hospital systems, and really dealing with some acute mental health struggles. Through my career, I was able to I'm not gonna lie, kind of fall into the criminal justice side. I started working with probation and how do we help individuals with mental health concerns access treatment, but also working with probation on how do we, not penalize someone for not being 100% compliant, but recognize the things that they are doing positive to continue on probation successfully and kind of make those steps in their life more positive. From that, in 2016, Denver came up with this idea of a co-responder model. A couple community members went around and kind of talked a little bit about, what would it look like to pair a social worker with a police officer. And so I got hired as the manager of that program, started out with 4 social workers going in, and then to where we're at now, we're at 26 social workers writing in a co-response fashion to behavioral health calls with officers. And then that leads us to where we're at now, which is the STAR program, which was something that was modeled off of Cahoots in Eugene, Oregon, and us being able to kind of take that next iteration of we're having the right response respond to 911 specific calls. So I'm going to start with our program. I always like to give context of how STAR came to be, and that started with the relationship we had with the Denver Police Department. In 2016, we started the co-responder pilot. It was kind of 4 social workers showing up to the station with a plucky attitude and hoping that we can kind of, work with officers and kind of give a additional skill set of mental health needs to the citizens of Denver, but also do that in a response that is bringing the officer with us. They have CIT skills It's about 40 hours of training, but that is kind of like the bare minimum of like kind of mental health 101 of how you communicate and understanding mental health. And we were hoping to advance that kind of knowledge that they had and advance that resource in a way that allowed them to feel more like they didn't want to walk away from something that they didn't have a solve for. And having a social worker in the car with them allows for that on-demand, immediate access to kind of a more creative solution. Oops. There we go. I always like to throw up the co-responder piece attached with like how our funding. We started out as an initiative from the mayor that is specific to creative programs that kind of reduce the likelihood of people entering the jail system. This was kind of, it's how I define it as kind of seed money for programs while we develop how would we long-term kind of come up with solutions. The Mental Health Center of Denver is a nonprofit, so they partnered with us, and we're actually, through our entire 4 years, going on 5 years now, we're actually able to bill about 68% of our services to Medicaid. So while there is a upfront cost of this is how much a program is going to be, that would be billed to the city, because we have the ability to kind of bill Medicaid as our first primary facilitator of that, we can kind of keep costs pretty low, which allows them to use that unspent money to kind of build out programs to where we're at now with 26 individuals. This is kind of a highlight of where we started from our co-responders, and it really was about building relationships with the officers in each district. It is, you know, the police definitely have they have the knowledge and skill set to be able to engage individuals that are in crisis. I think when we showed up, they didn't know what to do with us, and we're kind of like, you know, a little worried that we were kind of that touchy-feely social worker that didn't know anything about like crisis. And I will say our social workers tend to be of the side that are a little more cowboy in nature and very much like geared towards crisis and how do we solve crisis. How do we do it in a respectful way? How do we do it in a trauma-informed way? And I think the second we were able to take some of these individuals that were frequent callers to 911, we're able to come up with a solution that's more long-term in nature, that reduced the calls. It basically brought us immediately into the fold of police as an invaluable resource. We were able to get into the cars and do that kind of right off the bat. With the partnership and knowledge that, you know, this wasn't just social workers with the officer being the rider or the driver, it was them being part of the solution. And it kind of transformed how Denver's officers were viewed when we were able to engage some of these. So as we kind of went on, we noticed, you know, we started with the idea we wanted to build mastery on these. As we built mastery, we started adding stuff, which was like special victims unit. It started to build into you know, at-risk individuals, hoarding, fire department got on board, sheriff got on board, and we started seeing that there was more demand, which needed us to kind of increase how we were able to help the first responders. In 2019, we saw about 2,200 individuals. I think with 26 staff right now, we're going to far exceed that, closer to 4,000 contacts that we're going to have in 2020, even with COVID being kind of a restrictive factor attached to that. As we've grown, we've just noticed that we're able to impact more communities in a more effective way, and we're just getting better and better at how we're responding efficiently and making sure that we're doing the right response. The plus about being partnered with the Mental Health Center of Denver is we actually know the back doors to our agency and how to do it in a streamlined fashion. Because all of our individuals are licensed, we're actually able to do intakes for MHCD in the community. So instead of someone having to come to our clinic and set up all the, you know, the hoops and the jumping through all these extra things to get to, which can be a barrier to mental health treatment, we're able to do it on scene and being able to do it connect them to treatment and a psychiatrist and case management kind of on demand. I always like to show this. When we first started, we actually took 5 identified high utilizers of police contact, and we did when we had contact with that individual and then post. And don't get me wrong, a lot of work was put into these individual contacts, but we almost had a 98% reduction for that entire year of individuals that historically were seeing police on a very, very regular basis. We actually, one of these individuals that's the cost of the amount of time people were spending on him was the $118,000. He's actually someone that we're dangerously close to having as a peer mentor on our team. He's just done a tremendous recovery, a tremendous like role in how he views people. And we want to use his his expertise of how he engaged with us to kind of inform as a peer contacts in the future. And that's our first foray into kind of how do we bring peers into this work as well. So a lot of this, I'm kind of a bleeding heart piece where the money part isn't as important to me, but I know the dollars and cents of jail time and court time and officer time on individuals that are constantly having contact. If we can reduce the likelihood of that occurring, I think it helps the bottom line. And these individuals helped at that time justify our entire program costs just from the reduction in other areas that are pretty cost prohibitive. And then I just throw this on there as new tech tools. As we developed, we had to kind of roll with the tide. We were able to get Surface Pros in the community, which allows us to get signatures for just about anything. So we can do signatures and applications and stuff on the fly and submit them electronically. Our app allows us to kind of look up individuals that we've had contact with in the past and give us a red flags or alerts or like what their view of police are so that we can go into a situation a little more informed. The GPS edition is just for our ability to say if a clinician in the community that is looking for someone doesn't know where they are and we have contact with them on the corner of 16th and Colfax, that we're able to just kind of ping on our end, like we found them here, and they can kind of see if we've had 5 pings, kind of a general area of where that client is. That way we're not losing people in services, that otherwise is just because we can't find them. And then it brings us to STAR. So in last year, 2019, we actually got a contingent from Denver and heard about this Cahoots program that was taking place that really was kind of like right below our co-responder program. It was responding to calls that, the behavioral health concerns didn't rise to a level that warranted police at all. So we were really intrigued of like, well, is this something our co-responders could actually like turn into this? And we can have a more like, trauma informed approach and what that looked like. So we went up there in May of 2019 and met with Ben up there. And it sounds like he connected with you guys last week. And we're able to ride the van and realized pretty quickly that actually Denver would benefit from having both models, both the officer and clinician and the one clinician and paramedic that could go out and just respond. And we really related it to having the right response to the right need. There was a pretty strong lot of similarities attached with like our co-responder team that was in existence and the Cahoots model. And we joke really pretty regularly about how it was, an officer would show up to a call and he's just like, I don't know why I even have to come to be at this call. Like there's nothing legal about this. There's no concern. And we're just kind of like, yeah, we don't know why you're here either. And this allowed us to kind of get more information of like what the next iteration could be. These are since June 1st, 2020, when we created this thing and started and piloted it, we've been able to go on about 105 calls to service. We've been able to really kind of reach populations that have been historically a little more hesitant when officers make contact and do it in a very trauma-informed way. And it seems like they've even made some comments about how that's a different approach and that they don't feel as like threatened and they don't feel like there's like a legal cloud hanging over their head attached with it. So we did model all calls from 911 off of Cahoots, the low-level mental health crisis, the welfare checks, the low-level medical calls. But I think as Denver kind of grows on this thing, we're going to start noticing things that maybe STAR could take on that otherwise we hadn't originally thought of, just because the demographics of Eugene, Oregon and Denver are so, different in general. The individuals that went to Eugene, Oregon was our 911 dispatch. They spent an entire day with their 911 call takers and just kind of got a feel for like what it is that the calls that they were receiving. And that way they were able to bring that back to their call takers and say, here is what you should be listening for. Here's new questions that we never thought we would be asking for that. And then it really was just kind of from the 10 a.m. in the morning on day one, we kind of hit the ground running and there wasn't much stumble. There wasn't much concern. And I think a lot of that had to do with like their familiarity with our co-responder program and knowing that, we can go out and kind of do some of these things that we otherwise historically wouldn't have done. So we are piloting this right now, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. in the downtown corridor area. Our model is a little bit different. We do have a licensed person that is on the Star van, and we do have a paramedic. We're kind of calling it the Cadillac of how we rolled this out, because we wanted to make sure that we had the highest level of available expertise and knowledge on this pilot. That way we weren't saying, oh, I wish we had this. Instead, we can say, maybe we need to pare this down in the future when we go past a pilot. These are some of the measurements we're taking. As I'm sure you guys are very aware, there's a lot of stakeholders attached to like what is success of a pilot like this. I think from the Denver, as not an employee of the Denver city of Denver, you know, a lot of them are what's the reduction in police calls where police would have had to go to it, but instead they don't have to. What is the outcomes? How much did we reduce EMS? How much did we reduce fire having to go to some of these calls? And then putting a monetary attachment to that and say, hey, here is the reduction in cost associated for sending these guys out. From my side, it's more of how many of these individuals are we connecting to long-term support and connection. I think from the beginning, our goal has always been, we don't want to just, you know, show up in a crisis and get these people to whatever service is, like, you know, a transport to the shelter or a transport to, you know, a day shelter or something like that, because that doesn't solve the long-term problem of feeling support and having support in that person's life. What we really are intentional about is, what can we connect you with? Is that mental health supports? Is that housing supports? Is that, you know, do you need a case manager to follow up with you about food stamps, medication? Is it insurance, and being really intentional that we're making sure that we're connecting individuals with those long-term supports that hopefully will reduce the likelihood that 911 even has to be used in the future. So that's a kind of a tweak that we've really been trying to focus on primarily in Denver. Like I said, the first 15 days, we had about 108 calls. I think much like most data, we're trying to get our legs underneath us with what that looks like and how that looks. And being with the Mental Health Center at Denver, it's being able to share information with the city in a HIPAA protected way that's more aggregate and less individual, because we can't share individual data with what our contacts are, but we can share it in aggregate, and kind of being able to provide that sometime in the near future in a complementary nature to the Denver the Denver side. I think other than that, you know, I think it's been kind of a whirlwind, got a lot of press. I think a lot of this has to do with, a lot of the success of this has to do with people that have been part of the getting this off the ground and started. It was a lot of community driven projects, the Denver Justice Project, Dasher, Harm Reduction Action Center, mental health, police, comm center, and a lot of other stakeholders that have really had a lot of valuable information that can kind of help guide these programs and guide them in a more creative way of how do we, you know, take policing to a 21st century and make sure that the right response is getting there.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
that's
Richardson.
just
That was great. Do we have any, I'll let the record reflect that Councilwoman Anthony has joined us, Madam Clerk. Do we have any questions by committee members?
Not at this time, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank the gentleman. That was a great presentation, very concise and greatly appreciated.
May I ask one question, Mr. Chair?
Yep, Councilwoman Anthony, you say great, okay, there we are. Yes, Councilwoman Anthony, here we go, I'm sorry. How are you?
Good, how are you? I'm sorry.
Yep, you have the mic, you have the mic, Councilwoman.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I think I got here just in time. The licensed person you have on the truck, you have a licensed person and a paramedic, you said. Is it a licensed social worker or?
So in all transparency, it was kind of one of those COVID stopped us pretty significantly with like how we wanted to roll this out in April. And we kind of, at the time, we're just like, there's so much change in how social agencies are having to redo things and how people are engaging and people are falling out of service and just don't feel like they have support. So we ramped this up where we were like, we're going to step into COVID and help support our community. So in doing that, myself, a licensed social worker, and my colleague, Carly Salon, a licensed social worker, have been filling in for the van, and we're working on hiring someone. I think it's either going to be a licensed LPC or an LCSW, or I think a licensed marriage, family, and therapy counselor, something along those lines. There's 3 options in Colorado that someone could be for that. And I think that for the pilot is going to be kind of the goal.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman. We got Fire Chief Kenyon.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, very much. I had a couple quick questions. I'll email you with more later so I don't tie up everybody's time. But I noticed when you were talking about the first program where you had the people embedded in the police department, you said 67% of the cost was covered by Medicaid. In this program, is any of the cost covered by anybody else? For example, when you transport, you said you did have transportation. Is that a billable thing, and can you recover from insurance for that?
Yeah, so everything that kind of goes in our system, the Mental Health Center of Denver, like all that counts towards a billable service, because we have a pretty robust crisis system here and a connection with Colorado Access, which is our Medicaid provider, that we're able to say, like, in a crisis, anything that helps mitigate that crisis should be billable towards services. So if that means getting someone to our walk-in crisis center, if it means getting them to the clinic, if it means anything that helps reduce the likelihood of an amplification of behaviors, or, you know, God forbid, having to go to the jail or a hospital or something like that, that it qualifies as a billable service. Okay. And then do you cross-reference your high utilizers with EMS utilizers also with the police department? That's something we've been trying to do here. And we're part of a pretty standing EMS, I think it's bi-weekly meeting to kind of discuss those and how can we be proactive with supporting those individuals that seem to be the highest need. Okay. And then the last question I'll ask for now, and like I said, I'm going to email you a lot of other things. But when you said that there's email notification on discharge, is that something that the patient has to agree to take part in, or is that something that you're able to just get? Can you clarify that again? So one of your last slides, when you talked about technology and your apps and all that stuff, you said that there was an email notification on somebody being discharged from a hospital. Yeah. Is that something that the person would have to say, I'll agree to be part of this service, that you'll get notified when the person's released, or how do you get that availability of getting the email notification? So actually it's in, so anyone that is a current client of the Mental Health Center of Denver, they've already signed a consent for treatment. So if we just happen to come across them in the community, us doing a note in our system just notifies their treatment provider, which includes case manager, it includes therapist, it includes psychiatrist, maybe employment specialist, just to let them know that we had contact. The hospitals, when someone discharges, I don't have much say over what the hospitals do, but I believe it's just a notification that your client came through here, just giving you a heads up. I don't believe the client would probably have to consent necessarily. Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Committee members, any questions?
No, Mr. Chair, not at this time.
Ms. Sanaa, do you have any questions?
I do. Sorry, I don't have the hand raising capability, unfortunately. Yeah, I'm curious what your relationship is with so I'm the director of the Healthy Communities Office. We're the public health policy office for the city. I'm curious what your relationship is with your county or your state departments of health, or whomever manages your sort of higher level governmental behavioral health services.
So in Denver, and I believe it's the state, it's the Office of Behavioral Health. They actually fund three of our co-responders. So they're very much in the know of kind of like how these systems are developed. And I think the STAR program's not really touch point necessarily with them, but I know they've already reached out and said, hey, like we may need, since we're doing well with the co-responders, how do we duplicate something like this at a state level? So we've already been in touch with them of, how can we duplicate this just statewide more than anything.
Okay. In terms of your Medicaid billing and the tech support that you're provided, is that built in or did you have to bring on like another unique level of billing and tech support for your program?
No, I think it's like the saving grace or bonus is the Mental Health Center of Denver has been in existence for about 35 years now. So we already had that into our back infrastructure with how we just in general bill. So, laptops and all the stuff up front, we did have to request that on our budget when we were requesting the funds from Caring for Denver. But the back end stuff already was in existence, that the second we submitted something, it was already in the works of either being billed to Medicaid, and if Medicaid wasn't an option, then it was billed to the city.
Okay. I have a couple more questions, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. So, there are many providers who do or who could do the type of work that you do, and I'm wondering how you, how you work with other providers or engage with other agencies, either as subcontractors, as partners, as competition. How does that get navigated in Denver?
Yeah, I know. Co-responder wise, it is a every 5 years, it's a new RFP that goes out, and people have the ability to either put it in a competitive bid, and then I think that's a city based thing that every 5 years it goes out for bid. As far as like the relationships in the community, I think it's about no one knew who we were when we first started, and we just started showing up at other organizations saying, hey, this is what we do, or we respond to an organization that didn't know about us, but we were able to resolve something in a positive way. And then all of a sudden it kind of flourished what that relationship looked like, where now they know how to get a hold of us in a more timely manner. And my biggest thing is like 911 is such a reactive nature. And I think the population that we serve, like I would like to get to them before 911 has to be involved. So we have come up with pretty creative relationships with, drop-in centers, other providers, businesses to say, hey, if we sent someone here for 2 hours in the morning and someone identified that they would like to seek treatment or whatever that is, can we be proactive with engaging them in those services with the hope that we don't have to have, any future 911 calls or emergency response in general. So it really is about collaboration and kind of trust. And I think those are more like just nods that we can work collectively together. There isn't really a formal MOU or anything attached with that. It's just kind of just relationships through the work that we're doing.
Interesting.
So now you good? All set? So I just have a follow-up question a few, but I was just wondering, Chris, could you just quickly, just for my for all edification, can you be able to just give us the simple differences, if there are, between the CAHOOTS program and the STAR program? Are you able to explain the differences? And what are the similarities? Can you start with that? Help us out.
There's probably more similarities than differences. I think, the van, we modeled almost identical off of their van. Granted, we were a pilot, so we just tried to we had to kind of scramble for finding something instead of purchasing something. So their van is purchased. I think it's like a Mercedes or something, but it's a beautiful van. And then ours is a civilian crash car that they basically just stripped everything out of and said, here's some seats, here's some place for the medic stuff. So we, the van is pretty identical. The system that we operate in is pretty close. The data we collect is pretty close to what they do. I think that the big differences are more from like a state level. Individuals in Oregon that are licensed actually can't do mental health holds. The hospitals are the ones. So it's about getting individuals to from CAHOOTS, it's getting individuals to the hospital to get assessed whether or not they meet hospitalization criteria. In Colorado, any licensed person and officers have the ability to write the hold right there and then transport to the hospital. So our biggest thing from a license standpoint was we were thinking if we met someone in the community that did meet hold criteria, that really did pose a concern and an immediate risk to themselves, how can we most effectively make sure that they're safe, but also how do we not bring police into that to say, hey, we need you to write the hold on this very terrible thing, and kind of give police the worst version of that task, and only kind of reinforce the idea that they're there to do the worst part of the job. And we really wanted to take that ownership on our own, that someone going through crisis is looking for help. And if we can be the ones that take on the ownership of, we're just making sure you're safe. We have radios, we're able to call for an ambulance without police backup, and just say, hey, let me get on the ambulance with you. I'm going to go to the hospital with you. My partner's going to follow me. I'm going to make sure that you're ushered in there. And that way we can kind of make sure that we're keeping law enforcement out to the best of our ability, out of these kind of crisis situations where They don't need to be. And then the paramedic, Eugene uses EMTBs. We use a paramedic just because we wanted to make sure that we had at least a robust medical component attached with it. And I think at post-pilot, we're going to kind of discuss whether or not a licensed person is overkill or whether or not a paramedic is overkill. And I honestly, from my side, I would have told you about 4 weeks ago that a licensed person on this thing might be a little bit of an overkill because we're really trying not to do the mental health hold, but we've been on 3 that did require a hold where we were just kind of thankful that we had the ability to do that. And we did it in a way that kept police still out of that situation. And I think, our whole system is built on the idea that even if it rose to the situation where we did need to call police, the goal would be that we would be able to get a co-responder at that point to be the next level of access, to have someone that comes in and it's not just an officer coming into a situation, but have a co-responder officer and a clinician from our co-responder to be the next level that kind of steps up and takes on that next role.
So, Mr. Richardson, that actually dovetails into my follow-up question, my additional question, which is this: how does the calls get to the STAR unit? Does it go to the 911 system, and then the dispatcher asks some preliminary questions, and then makes the call? Say, okay, send a fire truck, send a police vehicle, send the STAR unit. How does that work? How does that get decided, and then how does it get implemented?
Yeah, everything goes through the 911 comm center, and they're all trained on kind of the triage tree of, is there a safety concern? If yes, then STAR can't go to it. Co-responder is a more appropriate avenue. If there is no safety concern and it's low-level mental health, or it's individual that community members are noticing there's just odd behavior and they just need someone checked on. If it's someone that's a lot of people like unresponsive on the street, can someone go check on them? Anything that kind of is that low level piece that there's not a safety component attached to it, they're sending to the STAR car. And because we have radios, we hear everything aired up, and they can request us specifically to go to a call. And we've been on a few where the radio room will say, hey, can you give us a call? And they kind of talk us through what the scenario is and say, hey, where's your comfort level with going to something like this? And it's nice to be, I kind of float the co-responder and STAR, so I know my comfortability attached with that, but it's nice to be able to know when we can, basically, I really appreciate the comm center for protecting my safety on some of these calls and being more conscious of my safety than probably I am, that they're willing to say, hey, is this something that you feel is appropriate for you to go on? And in most cases, we're saying yes on that anyway, so. So
it sounds like, Mr. Richardson, what happens is that when 911 call comes in, then there's a decision made. In theory, it may be maybe it's not safety concern, say, right? Maybe it's a NSC or something, non-safety concern. But then what happens is you're still in the entire, what do you call it, public safety umbrella, where someone knows you're out there at this location with your crew, your unit, and if something goes awry, you have backup for that. Is that correct?
Yeah, at any time we can call and say, hey, can I get an officer for backup? If it's we don't need an officer, we need EMTs. It's like, hey, can we get an ambulance to us? And we've noticed a trend where it was originally going to be 911 calls that police were going to, but we're actually having paramedics that are in the community that are going to scenes where they're also saying, like, this isn't something we can take care of. Can we call the STAR van to kind of help us out? So we're helping the paramedics. We've already talked with fire of kind of saying, hey, who are your people that you're going to? And, code 10 through the city on a fire truck is a scary thing for a lot of people. So if we can help say this person, they're not meeting a need and they're using maybe the fire resource in a not appropriate way, maybe we can send the STAR van instead and be able to kind of be, that's where, in the future, we're going to start sending the STAR van instead of requesting fire attached with that, and kind of being more creative of like solution oriented stuff that's more appropriate for whatever the response is in the community.
And I was wondering, so it sounds like the police department and the fire department, it sounds like you're all in it together. It's not like it's not just one or the other. It sounds like that there's the, whatever unit goes out there, the other units support each other. And so it sounds like you guys have, and I'm going to go towards police now because, as you know, that's the most And that's the big, that's the hot topic and issue going on, right? Is that, do you view them as the police involvement as a hindrance, as a help, or, as a necessity? What's your view if you can? And
Yeah.
then come to mine.
Yeah, I think we view them as an absolute invaluable partner in what we're doing. These don't happen without them kind of feeling comfortable that we have the skill set and ability to kind of do this stuff. I think it's a lot of trust in what we do. A lot of trust that we can go to these calls and know that we are safe. Because I will say from my standpoint, like the police, again, are way more concerned about my safety than I am. So they want to make sure that I am going into these calls knowing that I can look around and make sure that everything is like at least up. That if I call them, that they're going to be there to kind of be my secondary option for crises that may go and bubble up before STAR more than what STAR can handle. And the truth is, like, I think in the stuff we've done, about 40% of these calls are officers that sometimes are going to calls and recognizing they don't need to be, they're not a primary need at that one. And they're calling for us to like kind of go and like assess the situation. And in those calls on STAR, we've been able to relieve them and say, yeah, we'll take over. You guys can go back into service. And I think that helps them understand also like, hey, we're going to support you too. If you come across something that you don't think you're either capable of doing, or you don't think like it really warrants a legal response, like call us in and we'll take over and get you back into service to do the thing that you're kind of your goal was when you started the job. So I think we've talked with Cahoots pretty strongly about that like the partnership we have with law enforcement is like a valuable partnership, and just the relationship we have with them. And it all is about trust. And that goes with fire and paramedics and everyone. I mean, we're all kind of in that, like, you just hope that the person standing next to you is someone that you can trust. And when you need help, that you can call them for help.
Thank you. I have a couple more questions, but I know Councilman Ryan has another additional obligation. Councilman Ryan, you have the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too was interested in the partnership with public safety officials. So some of my questions were already answered. However, could you just elaborate for me, Chris, on the training that's provided to 911 operator, if you will? Who does that? Do you take part in that? Do you participate in it? How does that work?
Yeah, I actually can't speak for 911 and what their training is from like the get-go. I don't honestly know that. I will say all of our clinicians do get radio training just in general to like know how to navigate, how to talk on a radio. I mean, we're social workers. We never expected that to be part of our gig. So it was kind of a learning curve of how you talk. What does radio talk look like? How do you communicate? If you need information, how do you ask for it? The little scary red button on the radio that I'm never supposed to touch, like don't touch that button unless you're really in an emergency, and kind of being aware of just like, etiquette and like, how to communicate on that. And we've been to the 911 comm center just to get an idea of what that looks like. Cause I think a lot of civilians don't have that opportunity, and just being able to see like, how do calls come in? What do they look like? What questions are you already asking? So we kind of get a decent idea of like what the call takers on the 911 system are asking civilians in the community, so that we feel pretty confident of like, you're sending us to a call, and I feel very trustworthy that you've gone and done your due diligence to make are going to be going.
That was really what I was getting at. If the calls were being routed correctly and you had a good comfort level with that. And I guess the other question on partnerships that I have is on, do you have regular debriefing sessions with public safety officials to go over your experiences, problems with the process? Do you have any type of engagement in that regard?
We do. As a team, we hold weekly meetings, and we do one-on-one just to be able to debrief as like a community mental health team in general. This work is pretty stressful, so being able to make sure that we're de-stressing and making sure we're getting stuff off our plate is super important in the work we do. I think we do have liaisons at the Denver Police Department that we talk with on a regular basis, especially on calls that kind of maybe more problematic or hairy, or something came up, just to be able to kind of say like, how did we do? What can we improve on? How do we build on this? And just being able to do that more effectively.
And then just last, if I may, Mr. Chair, the types of calls, Chris, that you receive, do you have any data that you could share with us? I don't need you to go into it because I don't know if you have that with you, But I'm sure you categorize the calls that you get in, maybe you could share with us the largest percentage of calls that you respond to, what your success rate is on, and how many times do you actually have to call for backup?
Yeah, so I mean, it's brand new. I did send something, I believe, that kind of was like a preliminary data for the first 4 weeks. Most of the calls, I would say about 45% of the calls are actually individual. They call it move along, or like informed, and that usually is, someone calls in, this person is on the corner, we go there, and they're either we found them or we didn't, and then that individual, if we did find them, they were just kind of like, cool, yeah, I'll move along, or I'll leave this area, or I'll go with us to go to a different, or we show up to a place and quite honestly, like, we can't find anybody. The call to 911 was so quick and they disappeared. And then we get quite a bit of kind of low-level suicidal ideation, which is more, I don't have a plan, but I'm starting to like feel thoughts of just like not feeling safe, and like history of depression, and being able to work with those individuals and getting them to the walk-in crisis center just for additional support, being able to sit with those people and just being able to talk. We did get quite a bit of co-occurring, so intoxicated parties, people that are intoxicated, they maybe fall asleep on the sidewalk, and we basically just, very nicely wake them up, say, hey, can we get you over to the park under a tree? It's a hot day, let's get you shade. And something that's a little less like being sprawled out on on the street versus being under a tree is much more like it. People don't notice that as such a growing concern. We're very big on harm reduction. Like I know there's going to be individuals that don't like the idea of us just moving from one location to another, but someone that is not in an area of danger where they could get hit by someone, walked on by someone, but are in an area such as a park that allows them to kind of have a place to just rest, like, we're going to count that as a win. So I think that's what you call the calls.
Thank you. That answers my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I also let the record reflect that President Pro Tem Correa is present also. So I just have a couple of follow-up questions, if that's okay. I was wondering, could you explain a little bit of how the funding works? Was it Denver passed a bill or a budget, or a bond or a tax of some sort? Can you explain to me how the funding gets created for the STAR unit?
Yeah, so in 2018, there was a ballot that went on for voters about a 25-cent tax on every $100 that went to behavioral health programming. And it wasn't meant to supplant current funding for programs. It was meant to be creative and create new programs for behavioral health needs. That passed overwhelmingly. I think it was like 70% of the voters voted yes on it. And then they spent all of 2019 forming the board for Caring for Denver. And being able to basically, like, people had to start spending money to be able to utilize that. So they just waited for the tax money to roll in 2019, and then they started putting out RFPs for these programs in November 2019. And we were able to kind of put in a quick RFP for not only expansion of our co-responder team, but for the pilot of STAR. And that's where we got most of it from.
Thank you. Any other questions by committee members?
No, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Council members? Commissioner Parry, do you have any questions, sir?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Hey, Chris, when Denver went out to an RFP, how many other programs either bid on it or were awarded? Are you the only STAR program doing this mental health in Denver?
Yes. I think when the pilot rolled out, it was like, could this work in Denver? I mean, we had come to cahoots, but it was like, we weren't sure if this was something that, because Eugene, Oregon's much smaller, like, could this be replicated in a big city? So we were really intentional about how do we roll this out thoughtfully. So we just rolled it into the co-responder request as well, and said we would like 15 co-responders, and we'd additionally like to start the idea of this pilot. With the idea that I think it's December this year, that there's a likelihood that this would go out to RFP to expand to the entire city of Denver, and people could put in for, how this works. And and I don't think honestly, none of us really know if that's going to be, a lot of organizations working together in different areas of our city as kind of like one model, or is it one entity that takes it on, or is it, I think there's still a lot of questions that are going to be asked by the end of this.
Great, thank you. One other, if I could, any pitfall that you wish you could do differently that we could learn from, and what was one of the success starting up this program? I know the relationship with the police is probably vital, but any advice and guidance you may have for us?
I think the biggest thing is I think these programs don't work without the Department of Safety actually saying we need to do something creative. We need to break kind of our traditional how we respond to these things and being able to open that. And I think it's finding the right organization that can kind of be flexible. It is the right personalities that you hire for these positions. I've always equated it to, it's kind of like finding a leprechaun riding a unicorn. It's a weird niche area of social work to be able to kind of do this crisis work in the way you do it, and to be able to work with police and being able to work with fire and being flexible and being able to see scenes, and being just the ability to be flexible. So I think the biggest thing that I would suggest is making sure that law enforcement is very much involved in it and part of the solution. I think the pitfalls, we haven't experienced any with STAR thus yet. I think definitely incorporating community members, and not just community members that support police, but also community members that have opinions about changes with police culture, changing with systems culture, inviting, we have a member of our community that's on the, she's a part of Homeless Out Loud in Denver. Harm Reduction Action Center. I know harm reduction sometimes is a buzzword for people to say that it's enabling. And I think that's also someone you need to have at the table just to say, we need to think about things differently. It's not about 100% perfection. It's about how do we get over, how do we reduce harms to this individual just in general. And that can, I think it's getting everybody to the table that has an opinion that might not agree with each other, and doing it in a way that's, proactive and productive.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your time, Chris.
Thank you, Commissioner. Before Ms. Sanat's question, I just want to enter into the record, and I'm going to need a motion by our committee members. The multi-page PowerPoint that we went through and submitted by Mr. Richardson on behalf of STAR, can enter as Exhibit A, Exhibit 1, to continuing conversation about this.
Second.
Motion by Vice Chair Ryan, second by Councilman Castillo. Discussion, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
And there's a second document too. We're gonna, it's a two-page document from the Denver Public Safety, talks about the STAR program. Entered into Exhibit 2. Do I have a motion on that?
So moved.
Motion by Vice Chair, second by Councilman Anthony, I believe she said second. Thank you.
Second.
And Councilman Castillo, discussion, all in favor, aye. Thank you. Thank you. All right, let the record reflect that Councilwoman LaFortune has joined us. Next, we have Mrs. Sanat. Ms. Sanat, you have the mic, please.
Thank you. I'm wondering the role of peer recovery coaches in the work that you do. I know Rhode Island has made a really strong commitment to building up a workforce of peer recovery coaches.
Yeah, and I think that's something we're developing as well. I think we definitely tap in. It's an organization called Peer to Peer, and we're post contact with that individual. We call them while we're with them and say, hey, how do we get you connected with this entity? Again, in Denver, it's a Medicaid covered entity, and they just they're not partnered with any of us. They were just someone that reached out and said, hey, we'd really like to start incorporating peers into what you guys are doing, and how do we make that happen? And we're all about it. So. And I think the next iteration of kind of Denver's model is how do we bring peers onto a van like this? It's one thing to have a licensed person on there. I think it also kind of takes out a huge pot of very talented individuals that could do this work out of the equation. And I think we want to make sure we're not elitist to the point of it's only a licensed or nothing. And as we roll these out, how can we maybe have a STAR car that is licensed and one that is not, and if that person that's not needs support from the other one, then we are able to kind of link those. So I think as we develop, we want to make sure that the peer component is a huge component attached to this.
Thank you. Another question, I don't know about Denver's municipal code, but and I know you're just starting, but is someone trying to track municipal code violations as they might relate to behavioral health issues?
I'm actually not sure on that one.
Okay. Okay. And then, I know the work that you're doing is built into a larger, mental health center model, which seems fortuitous and great. But do you often see these issues as refer to nothing issues? We often are getting people in, we're trying to connect them to resources, but sometimes the resources just aren't there. And so I'm wondering, is that something you're seeing, the sort of refer to nothing issue in the Denver area, or is because you're embedded in a center that potentially could provide some of those services that hasn't been an issue?
I think from the mental health side, we have the ability, a very big wealth of mental health access and being able to do that. And we've shown a pretty big success rate. But you're right. I think it's a national thing, but Denver is pretty bad when it comes to substance abuse specific options, especially, it breaks my heart every time someone in the community that we have a touch point with is like, I'm ready to get in somewhere and get sober and I don't have somewhere for them to go. At that point, it is kind of that harm reduction of how do we make sure, like, is that MAT induction? Is that needle exchange? Is that going to NA? Is it going to AA? Is it going to whatever that is? But that's not really what they're asking for. And it's just because we don't have the capacity nor the resources to send that. Not only that, but Denver's housing market is through the roof, and the housing issues that are presenting in Denver are really problematic for our low income individuals. So, we have a big homeless population right now, and their big thing is like, how do I get into housing? And that's the one thing I don't have access to either, short of wait lists and here's where you should go. Can I get you there? But yeah, there is system gaps that we need addressed, and it's not the public, it's not police and it's not fire and it's not EMS that are supposed to solve that. It's kind of the whole system needs to kind of work on a more solution-oriented piece. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions by committee members, council members?
No, Mr. Chair.
No, thank you.
Well, first, I want to thank Mr. Richards, by the way, Mr. Richardson, I should say. Thank you very much, by the way. It's very informative, it was really helpful, I think, on this journey we're taking here in the city of Providence. I want to thank you on behalf of the chair of the committee, as the councilman, and represents a very diverse neighborhood, as well as a neighborhood that has a high percentage population is struggling financially. I don't represent a wealthy population at all. I don't represent any 1%ers and that. So the folks in my area looking and learning about what could be or make the system better. And I want to thank you very much, by the way, for doing this for us this evening. And I believe Chief Kenyon has some follow-up emails with you. And I think and Ms. Cotton, our internal audit, probably has some follow-up emails too.
yeah,
So with
absolutely.
that, I want to thank you very much. Really appreciate it. That said, there's no other further business before this honorable committee.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. That motion, second by Council Castillo. Discussion. Also, don't forget, I want to thank Chief Clemens, Commissioner Perry, I forgot to say that, Fire Chief Kenyon, of course, Alan Tanar, and I believe that I missed anybody else from the administration. Thank you for participating. Great questions. Thank you. And all in favor?
Aye.